My name is Yusuf. I'm not a big man in government. I don't wear suits or sit at high tables. I'm one of the quiet ones. I work behind the scenes at African gatherings. I've carried microphones for ministers, tested sound for presidents, and fixed chairs when important people come to speak. But on that day, in Ouagadougou, the capital city of Burkina Faso, I saw something I will never forget. It was the Pan-African Youth and Freedom Summit. People had come from all over Africa: Ghana, South Africa, Nigeria, Mali, Senegal, Kenya, all of them. The big hall was decorated with African flags. The theme was written in bold red letters on a white banner. One Africa, one voice. I arrived early that morning before sunrise. The security men were already setting up. Armed soldiers stood at every gate. Dogs sniffed the vans. People in suits walked in and out with papers. You could feel the tension in the air. I was part of the event crew, as usual. My job was simple: I was in charge of microphone management and speaker order. I had the list of who would talk and in what order. Nothing surprises me anymore, I thought. But I was wrong. The sun in Ouagadougou that day was unforgiving. The air was dry, and the fans inside the conference center were spinning but not doing enough. Everyone was sweating. Some ministers removed their jackets. Others wiped their heads with white handkerchiefs. The room was packed. I saw all kinds of people: presidents in their golden agbadas, soldiers in their uniforms, young African students with notebooks, women activists with head wraps, media with cameras. The hall buzzed with soft voices and quiet movement. Then, he walked in. No sirens. No drums. No big shouting. He came in like a regular person: no crowd, no long team behind him. Just 2 aides and 1 soldier. He wore a plain brown shirt, clean but simple, and dark green trousers. No medals. No shiny shoes. It was Captain Ibrahim Traoré. At first, not many people noticed him. Most of the high-level guests were looking around for flashy presidents. But when he walked past the red carpet and sat not in the VIP section, but near the youth delegation, that's when people began to whisper. Is that Traoré? He didn't sit with the others. Why is he in the youth corner? I was standing near the sound table, not far from where he sat today. I saw him up close. His face was calm, but his eyes were sharp. He looked like a man who had come with a message, not just to attend a program. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't waving. He was just watching. Listening. Some people tried to greet him. He nodded gently but didn't talk much. A few other leaders at the front noticed him now. One Nigerian official pointed and said, "What is he doing back there?" I watched him carefully. He held no paper. No speech file. Just a small black notebook in his hand. He opened it once, then closed it. I remember thinking, he didn't come here to speak. He came to say something real. As the summit began, speakers were called one by one. The president of Ghana spoke first. Then a minister from South Africa. Then the head of the African Youth Parliament. They all said good things about unity, peace, and development. People clapped politely after each speech. But I noticed something. Traoré didn't clap. Not even once. He sat there, still, his eyes fixed on every speaker. He looked more serious than everyone else in the room. I moved closer to the stage, pretending to check the microphone, but really just watching him. There was something heavy about the way he sat today. Like he was carrying a truth no one else was willing to say. Then, one of his aides quietly walked up to the back of the hall and tapped the protocol officer. I saw the officer's face change. He walked quickly toward the chairperson of the summit and whispered something in her ear. She paused, looked down at her program list, and then looked up at Traoré. She leaned forward and asked, "He wants to speak." The aide nodded. The chairperson blinked. "He's not on the list," someone said behind her. "He didn't submit a speech." But the woman, a strong speaker from Namibia, looked back at Traoré and said, "Let him speak." That moment was the beginning of something big. I remember holding my breath. I looked at my speaker list. His name wasn't there. Yet I was about to watch him do what no one else in that room had the courage to do. He didn't come to play games. He didn't come to talk about foreign loans or empty promises. He came to speak truth. And I knew, right there in the middle of that hot hall in Ouagadougou, something was about to happen. I was still standing near the sound table, holding the speaker list in my hand. My fingers were shaking a little, not from fear, but from something I couldn't explain. A strong feeling had entered the room. Traoré was going to speak. And nothing about it felt normal. The chairperson gave a slow nod. One of her assistants walked over to the podium and whispered something to the announcer. That's when I heard it. "Now, we invite His Excellency, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, President of Burkina Faso, to give his remarks." There was a short pause. Some people clapped. Some just looked confused. "He wasn't scheduled," I heard someone whisper. A minister from East Africa leaned toward his colleague and said, "This should be quick." I watched as Traoré stood up. He didn't rush. He didn't smile. He adjusted the sleeves of his brown shirt and walked slowly to the podium. His footsteps were the only sound in the hall. No loud music. No dramatic lights. Just him and his voice. He stood behind the wooden podium. He looked across the room, from left to right. Then he leaned forward and said in a voice that was calm but heavy, "Africa cannot keep quiet anymore." The room froze. You could hear papers stop rustling. Even the camera crew stood still. Traoré continued. "We are here talking about youth, freedom, and unity. But let us stop lying to ourselves. We say we love justice, but we punish those who speak up. We say we are one Africa, but we allow our own brothers to rot in prison." Now everyone was listening. People shifted in their chairs. Some tried to look at their phones, pretending to check messages, but you could tell they were uncomfortable. There is a man locked up in Nigeria. His name is Nnamdi Kanu. Some of you in this very room have called him a threat. You've called him a rebel. You've called him dangerous. He paused. But I say it here today, with all my heart and with no fear, Nnamdi Kanu is not a terrorist. He is a freedom fighter. A true African son. A lion in chains. That was the moment everything changed. I watched a minister from Nigeria lower his head. Some old diplomats whispered to each other nervously. But the youth section, sitting just a few rows from me, suddenly sat up taller. One of them, a woman from Côte d'Ivoire, put her hand on her chest. Another, a student from South Sudan, whispered, "He said it." Traoré did not stop. You may not agree with all of Kanu's words. I don't agree with everything either. But let us not forget, he stood for his people when many others chose silence. He refused to kneel. He refused to be bought. He said what others were too afraid to say. He looked directly at the older leaders. And for that, you locked him up. He paused. The silence was loud. Let me make it clear. I wrote him a letter with my own hands. Not a typed letter. Not something written by aides. I took a pen and I wrote to him. I told him, "Brother, your voice has reached us. Your courage has been heard in Ouagadougou. You are not forgotten." Gasps spread across the room. You could feel the shock, an African president admitting he sent a personal letter to Nnamdi Kanu. Some older leaders looked angry. A man from a North African country stood up and whispered something harsh to his assistant. But the people, the regular people in the room, looked inspired. "I didn't write to him for politics," Traoré said. "I wrote to him because the African struggle is bigger than borders. When one voice is caged, we are all caged. When one of us is silenced, we are all silenced." Now claps began to rise, slowly, from the youth section, then others. One young man from Liberia stood up and clapped hard. A woman from Uganda shouted. Say it again. Traoré raised his hand to calm the room. Then he dropped the final stone. If we continue to punish our freedom fighters, if we continue to sell out our brave ones, then we are not building a free Africa. We are building a new prison with golden walls. He stepped away from the microphone. No handshake. No photos. Just calm footsteps, walking back to his seat, like a soldier returning from battle. I stood there, holding the MIC list, my fingers still frozen in place. He had spoken for less than 15 minutes. But he had said more truth than some leaders say in their whole lives. The room was no longer the same. People were standing. Some were crying. Some were shocked. Some angry. But no one was silent anymore. I saw the Nigerian delegation whispering quickly among themselves. The Ghanaian delegation was nodding. And the youth activists? They were smiling. Hopeful. Proud. One girl leaned toward me and said quietly, This is why we still believe." And I just nodded. Because I had no words. I had just seen Traoré break the silence that had kept Africa chained for too long. He didn't come to be liked. He came to speak the truth. And I was there to witness it. After Captain Ibrahim Traoré finished his speech, the room didn't settle. Usually, after a president talks, people clap, they smile, and the event moves on. But not this time. Traoré had dropped a match in the middle of dry grass. And the fire started to spread immediately. Some ministers refused to clap. A few older delegates looked around, unsure what to say. But the young people in that hall? They stood up. Some with tears in their eyes. Some holding their fists in the air. Some chanting quietly. Africa must rise. Free Kanu. We hear you, Traoré. I stood near the sound booth and just watched. For the first time in my years of working these events, I saw something real. Not a show. Not sweet lies. Just one man standing for truth, and the whole room feeling it in their bones. I stepped outside after the session ended. The sun in Ouagadougou was still hot. But it was nothing compared to the fire happening online. I opened my phone and saw hundreds of messages. Videos of Traoré's speech were already everywhere. People were sharing it on WhatsApp, Twitter, Facebook, Telegram, every app you could think of. One post read, "Traoré has done what no African leader dared to do." Another said, "We need more leaders like this. Kanu is not forgotten." In just 1 hour, over 20 countries had picked up the story. Youth movements from Kenya, Nigeria, Ghana, Senegal, and South Africa started reposting the speech with one message. This is what true African brotherhood looks like. I went back inside the venue. People were no longer talking about trade or business. They were whispering, arguing, and shaking their heads. The Nigerian delegates looked shaken. I overheard one of them say, "We didn't expect him to say that. Not openly. Not here." But it was already too late. The words had been spoken. And you can never speak truth. That night, I didn't sleep. I stayed in my hotel room and watched the reaction grow. Journalists were calling it a turning point in African unity. Youth groups were calling for peaceful protests. Some were even writing letters to their own presidents, asking, "Why haven't you spoken up for Kanu?" The next morning, something even more powerful happened. A young journalist from Nigeria posted a tweet. It said, "Someone inside DSS says Nnamdi Kanu heard the speech." He smiled. Then he closed his eyes and said, "Ibrahim Traoré is a real brother. Tell him I heard him." I stared at the screen for a long time. That was the moment that broke me. Kanu heard it. Inside that dark detention center. Somehow, the message reached him. And it gave him strength. I imagined him sitting on a thin mattress in a cold room. No sunlight. No crowd. No microphone. Just his own thoughts. But then a message came through the walls. A message carried by voices, by phones, by whispers. You are not alone. That's what Traoré had done. He didn't free Kanu with money or lawyers. He didn't visit him with TV cameras. He did something more powerful. He spoke truth in public where the whole world could hear it. And truth has a way of traveling, even into prison walls. By the end of that week, I saw African newspapers talking about Nnamdi Kanu again. Not with insults. Not with labels. But with questions. Should Kanu's voice be heard at the AU? Was Africa wrong to ignore him? Is it time to revisit the case? Even in places where people once feared his name, they began to discuss it openly. Slowly. Carefully. But truthfully. And me? I stayed in Ouagadougou for 2 more days. I walked past youth centers and cafes and heard young people talking about Traoré. One young woman was showing her friend the video and said, "See how he spoke? No fear. No paper. Just heart." And I smiled quietly. I walked back to the same conference hall where it all happened. It was empty now. The flags were still hanging. The chairs were still in place. But something was different. Something had changed in that room. And maybe, in all of Africa. Because I was there when Traoré stood up and said, "Kanu is not a criminal. He is a freedom fighter." I was there when truth shook the silence. I was there when the chains of fear began to crack. I was there when Africa took a small step forward, not with weapons, not with politics, but with courage. And that step? It started with one man's voice. And another man's silent smile from behind bars.